Welcome everyone. I hope you can hear me all well. Welcome to this first of our Euro seminar webinars that we have now started today. So this is our pilot episode. Many of you know that a couple of weeks ago we had an in-person Euro seminar in Prague, and we loved the time with all who were there. And lots of the feedback that we got is that people wanted to connect more often, that we should find a way to get together, keep that spirit and the momentum and the ideas flowing. And so we launched these webinars now to give us this space to connect again, to keep sharing ideas and thoughts, to have an engaging keynote speaker every time, to speak of the expertise on topics that are current and relevant. And so this is the space that we have created for this. We thank everyone who's been contacted through email, WhatsApp, or personal invitation. Next time we'll have a more maybe formal application process where you can sign up and get a standardized Zoom link that then will not change anymore. But we didn't have time to set everything up. So I hope everyone who is here got our info. So welcome there. Then, as I said, we'll have it on our website. There will be updates and news on upcoming webinars. We plan to do these every month. The plan is to do it every fourth Friday, but it also depends on the availability of the speakers. But all the news you will get either on the website, or we've also so the website is euroseminar.byu.edu. But we've also created this WhatsApp group for all alumni, everyone who has been part of the Euro seminar before. So I'm putting the link into the chat. You can also join that WhatsApp group for news and announcements right there. Okay, then a couple of more announcements before we start in today's session. We'll have, as I said, more webinars to come. Wait a second, I'll pull them up. So next month, we'll have the privilege to hear from our good friend and mentor, Hans Noth, on the topic of religious freedom. This will be on September 23rd, again, a Friday. This is in 4 weeks at 7 p.m. Europe time and 6 p.m. British time, or whatever that is for wherever you are. And then we have 2 more planned for October and November. They're not fully confirmed yet, but we're hoping to get Bishop Gerald Caussé and Sister Camille Frank Olsen. They will speak to us in hopefully October and November respectively. Okay. Then we will start with today's session, and we will start with an opening prayer, and Brother Vincent Snickers will give that for us.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee to be all gathered today to listen to Traci DeMarco. We ask Thee to bless us with the Spirit so that our mind may be enlightened, and that the speaker may be inspired. We thank Thee for this opportunity to be gathered, and we say these words gladfully in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Vincent. All right. To give you a quick outline of this evening. We are planning, well, we will hear from Traci in just a minute. She will be our keynote for this evening. After the presentation, we'll have a few minutes, depending on time, for a Q&A. So this will go for, well, the whole presentation, including the Q&A, will probably go for about an hour. And then afterwards, we'll break out into breakout rooms, and we'll have about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 people per breakout room, to give us the opportunity to engage in smaller groups, to discuss what we just heard, share ideas, and go off from what we've just learned. Okay. Then it is my privilege to introduce Traci to you. Pull it up here. Okay, Traci DeMarco is from Glasgow in Scotland originally, for all of you who haven't met her yet. She's married and has twin boys. She had a couple of companies and enterprises with her husband, but then had a change of career, which was inspired by her calling as a Relief Society president. She got trained as a counselor and is currently employed at the University of Northampton. And many of you know her already from Prague. Many have been with her. She talked about divorce and the opportunities and challenges this has for marriages and for families. And after the Prague seminar, we went up to her and asked her if she would be willing to come back and take everything that she experienced in the Prague seminar and see, okay, on the topic of families, on the topic of relationships, what is her key takeaway, and what did she feel on this on the Prague seminar that it was most needed, or that like people were most interested in continuing that discussion from Prague. So she will talk to us today about let's talk about talking and why it is sometimes so difficult. And with that, Traci, I hand the time over to you.
Oh, thank you, Eric. Well, it's so great to be with you all again. I didn't really think I would be, so this feels so pleasurable to me. I don't know about you, but for me, Prague was really special. I think the place, I think the topics that were discussed, but mostly it was the one-on-one conversations I had with people that I just found so inspiring, enlightening, educational, thought-provoking, and moving in many cases. So I'm grateful to be with you here tonight and remember that experience a month ago, but I'm also just wanting to thank each of you for what you gave to me when we were together in Prague. It really was an extraordinary experience for me. Okay, so let's talk about talking and communicating and connecting, and I'm going to talk about attachment and conflict. We've got it all tonight. And the wonderful thing is, when we were in Prague, Eric let slip that he had studied conflict management at university. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting, because all the theory says that conflict is actually really good for our relationships. But there are very few people, myself included, that I ever talk to that find conflict comfortable. Usually we want to avoid it like the plague. And so I approached Eric and said, please, will you join me in my presentation tonight? Because you can definitely teach me a lot. And I think it would just be so interesting to learn about conflict. And I don't think you can have a conversation about communicating and the pitfalls and the trip ups and the strategies without also talking about conflict. Okay, communication is complex. You know, there's a formula. It goes 55, 38, 7. I don't know if any of you know what they relate to, and by all means, put things up in the chat as I'm talking if you feel to. But there was a researcher in body language called Albert Meribane, not quite sure I pronounced his name right, but he discovered that when we're communicating face to face, this ratio is important. And it's made up of these components. He believed that 55% of what we communicated was through body language. And, you know, I'm married to an Italian. That means I'm allowed to use my hands when I speak. So I'm a real hand talker. So things like that, and how we're using our facial expressions, and even where we're placing our body is all giving off communication cues and clues. The 38% was to do with tone. The tone we use. Is it gentle, compassionate, caring? Is it excited and enthusiastic? Or is it dry or irreverent? There are so many different tones. And he believed that was 38% of what we communicate. And if you do the maths, that leaves about 7% actually for the words we say. And I remember the first time I heard those statistics, I was thinking, that can't be true. Surely not. Surely 7% of the words of what we communicate being words, that can't be right. But that's what he reckons in face-to-face work. And certainly as a therapist over lockdown, I was very aware of how much harder I had to work when some of my work went onto telephone communicating, because I had to then really listen very carefully to the tones, the accents, the pauses, the emotion in the voice, because 55% of my clues had been taken away from me. 55% of what the client was doing with their body, I could no longer see. And again, in therapy, I am really looking at the body, the tone, and the words in what my client's communicating to me, to make sure that all three of those components are congruent. And sometimes I'll come across a client who's saying something terribly sad or distressing, and they're saying it with a big smile on their face. And, you know, I'm recognizing that that's a protector, that smile on their face is stopping them feeling perhaps the horror of what they're telling me. And so I'm just paying attention to body language. Will the client sit back? I think we all know what folding the arms means. Think about where that fold lands, right in the solar plexus, right in the core of the body. That's a real protector. I'm protecting what I feel is vulnerable. And that's what could cause me the most damage, something in my solar plexus. So that's what I'm guarding. So just very interesting to see body language. And we're picking it up from one another, sometimes on an unconscious level, but we're hearing this communication. So is it any wonder that sometimes we misunderstand things, that we sometimes miss one another in our communication and end up jumping to conclusions, and sometimes the wrong conclusions? And I've got a story to tell you about this that really helped me understand this principle. So I'd had a big argument with my husband, and that's very unusual for us because neither of us like conflict. But this time it had happened and there'd been conflict and I was angry. And so I thought, right, I need to get rid of this energy I've got inside me because I'm really angry. So I got on my bike, my cycling bike, and I started cycling. And I was going over and over all the things. I was sort of growling. And then eventually I got really tired. And that didn't take me long. I'm not very fit. But once I got tired, I was starting to think, what happened? Why did he say that? And I was thinking, well, what did I say before he said that? And then I was thinking, okay, so what did you mean to say? And what did you actually say? And I started to realize that they were two different things. And what did my tone and my body language say? And then I started to work out that everything I had presented was not what I had meant. And then I thought, drat, basically. And then I thought, well, what did he say? And that doesn't sound like the kind of thing he would say. I wonder what he meant. Or alternatively, let me just think about what he really said or what I heard. With all my filters, with all my previous experiences, all my upbringing and conditioning and all the stuff that filters this information when I'm angry and my frontal cortex has gone offline because I'm in fight or flight. So all rationale in a way has left the building. And then I started to really understand how much can be missed in communication, how much we can think we're saying, but we're not, or how much we can think the other person is hearing, but they're not. And sometimes a nice wee phrase I use in counselling and that could be helpful for you if you're ever in that situation is to just say, can I just ask, what did you just hear there? Or what did you think I just said there? And that's a great way of just checking in. Are we still on the same page? And I just want to just ask you, can you think of a time when you have felt misunderstood or when you have tried to communicate something and you just think, I'm not sure this is getting picked up. I think I'm being missed. And just think, what was it like? What was it like to feel misunderstood? I'll just give you a wee second to think about that. Now, communicating, speaking. Like I said, mistakes can happen. And it's almost a bit of an art. And I wonder if nowadays, with our phones so close to us and our fingers so agile at texting, if we're losing the ability to have verbal conversations, or perhaps our children will lose the ability to have verbal conversations, which will be such a shame because it is such a beautiful art, a beautiful skill. It's so necessary for us as human beings. But I sometimes worry there are so many contentious, sensitive issues out there. And like I said, sometimes it's complex to give and receive accurate messages. I hope we don't get to a stage where we just decide to text because it's easier. So let me give you some ideas of some of the mistakes we make when we're talking. Well, we can do a lot of speaking, but not a lot of listening. Listening is so vital. A lot of the time we'd rather speak because then we feel we're in control. But listening is a wonderful art. And Stephen Covey said it perfectly when he said, most of us don't listen with the intent to understand. We listen with the intent to reply. And I would just encourage you to think about that and maybe start to just get curious about yourself in your conversations. When you're talking with somebody, are you listening, really, really listening? Or are you already scheming what you're going to respond with, what you're going to come back with? Because if you're doing that, then you're not hearing, you have stopped listening. And Buddha said this, and this is a paraphrase, but he said something like, if your mouth is open, you're not learning. And Calvin Coolidge, which was the 30th US president, said, no man ever listened his way out of a job. And so maybe these are great reminders of just how important listening is. Another thing we can do is we can, in our conversations, interrupt. Now, I'm really bad at this, I must admit, because I get like overexcited, and I also have a terrible memory. So, and these are all my excuses. I know I'm rationalizing this bad behavior, but I'm a real one for jumping in when someone's talking. I get overexcited. And so, yeah, that is definitely one of my errors. And then sometimes we ask too many distracting questions. And sometimes we just ask too many questions, and the person can feel a little bit interrogated. Rather than it being a conversation, rather than it being free-flowing with a lovely rhythm, it becomes maybe more bulleted and a bit more interrogatory in style. And something else we can do is dominate the conversation. I can hear the irony in this as I'm presenting to you. But yeah, if it's only your voice that you can hear, maybe you have to for a little bit. And then eye contact, not too stary or glary, but just open, curious, a nice glancing. So just to give the message, I'm here, I'm connecting, I'm interested, I am listening. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about what gets in the way of having good conversation. Maybe the stuff that's going on a little bit underneath the conversations that we have, or the relating that we have. And I just want to show you a couple of scenarios. Eric, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, I don't know if you're aware of Kaufman's drama triangle. This is really popular in psychotherapy, certainly in the work I do. It's from TA, transactional analysis, from that approach. And it's very interesting, and it pops up all the time. Now, this plays out in our conversations with others, and also in our conversations with ourselves. So it happens externally and internally. So as you can see, there are three positions to the triangle. And we have the victim position, which is all about, all about vulnerability, feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, feeling I can't do this is too big for me, somebody help me. And that can come across in the language that's used. And then we have rescuer, and that can be really pulled in by someone who's in the victim role. And rescuer comes along to save. I think of rescuer as the knight in the white charger galloping towards you, saying, "Don't worry, I've got this, I can fix this." And they offer help, they offer ideas, they tell you what to do if you're in victim position. And we'll talk about the pitfalls in a minute. And then there's persecutor, and persecutors into blame. They're not aware of their own power and control. They're negative, they're critical, and they put someone into victim, or they blame the person who's in victim. So these are three areas that we can whiz about very quickly. And let me just give you a little scenario. So say somebody comes to the bishop and comes to the bishop and says, "Oh, Bishop, I've got a really big problem. I don't know what to do. I need you to help me, tell me what to do, help me with it." And the bishop listens patiently and understands what's being said and feels like, "Oh, I really want to help this person. What I'll do is I'll organise for the elders' quorum to come round and do the garden." And so he says to the victim, the person who's in the victim role, "I'm going to get them to come round, they're going to do your garden, it's all going to be great." And the victim comes out of the bishop's office, either saying, "Thanks very much, brilliant idea, I'm sorted until the next time, because I've not learned anything, I've not found my own answers here, someone's come along and rescued me." Or what can happen is victim can say, "See that bishop? I didn't even want someone to come and do my garden. Now I've got people coming to do my garden. Now I've got another problem. I'm going to have to feed them and give them lunch." And so the victim has shot up into persecutor and the bishop has shot down into victim position. Or the victim might say to the bishop, thanks, but no thanks. Because sometimes we want to stay in victim. Sometimes we want to stay in that position for a wee bit. There's some payoffs. And so then the bishop's left scratching his head, saying, I did everything I could. I tried my best. I came up with a great idea. I was going to send round the elders' quorum and the garden was going to get done. What's wrong with that victim? That's the last time I give that victim any advice. And before you know it, the rescuer has shot across the persecutor. Can you see in that little diagram how quickly we can move around the drama triangle? And so this is a dynamic that can come out in our vocabulary, can come out in our communication. And sometimes we can get caught up in this drama triangle without really knowing it. I say to my clients who are members sometimes, the drama triangle feels to me very like the natural man. It feels quite natural to us, I think, to get caught in this. And of course, the way out of it is empowerment. But we'll talk about that at a later date. But I just want you to just think about these areas and think, do I recognize this ever playing out in my life? Do I recognize it internally? I'll have clients that will shoot up and down the victim and persecutor axle. They will be very, very critical and harsh on themselves and then feel very hopeless, helpless, small, unable. And of course, it's no wonder because of the criticism that persecutor is dishing out to them. Okay. I'm going to hand the time over to Eric for a little bit. Eric's going to teach us something now.
Thank you, Tracy. That was great so far. So I'm going to talk to you, as Tracy already mentioned, a little bit about conflicts. As President Uchtdorf, or Elder Uchtdorf now said, conflict is inevitable. It just happens in life. Wherever there's people together, conflict often happens, and it has to be resolved one way or another. So before I jump into this, I just wanted to say 2 or 3 things about myself, just so you know, like, who the heck is Eric and like what does he have to do with conflicts. So my name is Eric Hachenberger. On the very left, you see my family, my wife and my daughter. And I'm actually really blessed to have a wonderful marriage. It's been really probably the biggest blessing in my life. It's the best relationship that I could have asked for. But I also know that, you know, relationships take work and, you know, we have not been without our own problems and troubles and things that we had to solve and negotiate. So on the one side, I know and I'm glad to experience like how a marriage really can work greatly. But I've not come to this unscathed. So I also know how devastating conflict can become, especially when we're unaware how we are contributing to the conflict. So in the middle, you see a picture of my parents when they were married. But when I was in my teenage years, they got divorced. No, just didn't work out for them anymore. And it was not a pleasant or easy time for me, because as I'm sure many of you, if not all, at least know some close, friends, family, acquaintances that got through a divorce. It's very emotionally taxing for everyone involved, and it tends to suck in people. And the one part, as this was going on, I made a terrible mistake. So in this divorce of my parents, I picked a side. I was so fed up with everything going on. I just, said like, well, I think my mother is right. And I ended up, shunning my dad completely, wouldn't talk to him anymore. And this, didn't only affect, the relationship between my father and me, but it kept pulling in people from around us. grandparents and uncles and cousins and friends and ward members, and it became this huge vortex where this conflict was escalating, and I was not helping in stopping that. I was actually adding to it, but I felt very much like the victim here. But this was for a long time a big challenge in my life. But through a couple of let's call them divine interventions, I ended up at the other side of the world. I went to BYU Hawaii, and I found out that actually I'm not alone in this. That conflict is not something that just happens to us, but that we actually can solve conflicts, that we can actually not make it worse, but solve them in a way that makes relationships better. And I ended up studying something that's called peace building, or as Traci mentioned, conflict resolution. So this is where I'm coming from. And with my little part in Traci's presentation, I want to answer two questions. First, now, I want to look at why do we struggle so much with solving conflicts? Why do conflicts so often in our lives go downhill? Like just spiral out of control, and make relationships worse. And then later, I will talk a bit about how we can start solving our conflicts, and hopefully I can also restore some faith that peace is really a possibility. I've learned that, and I know it's possible. It's not easy, but with the right work we can get there. Okay, so I'm going to outline three main parts of why conflict is so hard for us. The first one is our nature. Our human nature. It's like we're not really good at it from the get-go. That means when you do a conflict style assessment, for example, most people everywhere in the world, no matter of demographics or age, are conflict avoiders. We don't like conflicts because it takes us out of our comfort zone, and we might know that there's an elephant in the room, but we rather not address it. And we think maybe if we don't touch it, if we don't say anything about it, it might just go away. A second part of our human nature is maybe in our culture. And especially at church, we often talk about that the spirit of contention is of the devil. And what we often, at least how I was taught it often means is like the spirit of conflict is of the devil. Whenever there's an argument between people, it's immediately the devil's influence. We'll get to why this is not true at all in a minute. And the third thing here is probably that we are also afraid of conflict. We feel like, okay, the relationship might be affected, so let's not lean into that conflict. Let's not address it. Let's maybe find a quick solution, but I don't want to really address it. The second reason is because we're by nature so bad at conflict, we try to push it away as much as we can. And over, eons of evolution, we have become really good in finding psychological tools to shift conflict away from us. It is often called self-deception, which is a really hard thing because we are, as it says, like we're deceiving ourselves and we can't see it anymore. We do that first by justifying away bad actions. So we do something wrong, but then say, well, under the circumstances, actually, it was not that bad. It was okay. The person maybe deserved it. I probably still did the right thing because of the circumstances. So we are really good at finding quick, light second speed justifications to just push away everything that we've done wrong and feel good and have a good conscience again. The second part we do then is by doing so, we also push or we shift the responsibility from the other person, from us onto the other person. It's like, it's not my fault. And we can then blame the other person. Like, well, because he did that, he's the reason that I ended up doing this or that, and it's actually his or her fault. The problem with all these responses to conflict is that they really make us blind. We don't see how we're adding to the conflict anymore. We feel like, maybe like I did in the conflict of my family, it's like, I'm not adding, I'm the victim here. There's nothing that I'm adding that makes it worse. And as I was at that time, we really are fully blind to all our contribution to conflicts. And I'll talk in a minute about how to break through this blindness. And a last thing, when we, the reason number 3 is like, when we have to engage with conflict, sometimes we cannot avoid it, sometimes we cannot justify it away. We have lots of faulty tools that we have picked up along the way. The thing I probably hate the most is the counsel to never go to bed with an unresolved conflict. I'm sure all of you who are married have heard this. It's not that it's a wrong suggestion. It's just some conflicts cannot be solved in an evening. You know, some conflicts run deeper and they have to be addressed again and again until they're thoroughly solved. But if we just, have a quick fix, maybe like it's called a Band-Aid method. We just put like a Band-Aid on it, and we feel like maybe conflict is like our skin; it will just heal overnight and is perfect. No, actually, the opposite is true in conflict. Time makes it worse. It's like it just deteriorates further, like a building that is not attended to. Then what I've also heard a lot is that people say, well, you just have to communicate better. You just need to talk it out. And while this is true to a certain extent, especially when we're in conflict with a person, when we're self-deceived, what we're communicating is blame. We're just, we're not good at communication when we're in a conflict. It's actually, I've heard it compared to, if you tell people, just communicate better, it's often like telling a newborn baby, just walk, it's easy. But, it's not. So we also need to find a way to make the communication safe and productive again, because communication can also be destructive, especially when we're locked in a conflict and we don't know how to get out. And all this leads to often is in people, it's just a loss of hope. People feel like they're alone in this, feel like that the other person will never change. And in conflict, it often goes like that. We feel like the other person is at fault, he should change. And what is he thinking? Well, Eric's at fault, he should change. So who at the end changes? Nobody. But the problem, as I said, like when conflicts don't get addressed, it actually gets worse. There's a little anecdote with which I will finish before I give it back to Traci. It's called the oatmeal analogy. I share this a lot, so maybe you've heard it before. But when you have a bowl of oatmeal and you just finished eating it, you have a little residue there. And if you go to the sink and you wash it out right away, then it's easy. But if you leave it out on a counter overnight, it like hardens. So yes, don't go to bed with an unresolved conflict. It's true, but you really need to solve it. And the quicker, the better. But as you see, we're often not equipped to do this. So yeah, for now, these are the 3 reasons why it is so hard for us often to solve our conflicts. And I'll come back after Traci's next part to, how to start solving our conflicts.
Thank you, Eric. I love that. And I see this a lot in the couple work I do. When a new couple comes into my room, generally what they're saying, sometimes explicitly, always implicitly, is, I'm fine. If you could just sort them out, then we could just go home and everything would be fine. So blame, you're right. It really does manifest in conflict. Okay, so as well as all the communication stuff, I just thought it would be really helpful to show you some other things, again, that's playing out or that we bring with us into our relationships, especially our romantic relationships. And I just want to talk a little bit about attachment style, because what's happened in our first caregiving relationships, like mummy and baby, and I'll probably use the term mother or mum. It can be dad, but we are also, we're learning things all the time, and we're actually learning just how aware a baby is in utero of the mother, and that bonding has begun even then. So the baby knows the heartbeat, the sound of the mother's voice. A newborn baby will recognize its mother's face. And it's unbelievable. And of course, this plays out in children who are maybe not well and are put in incubators for a while and they're not with their mum, or babies who are adopted, or even babies of parents with, or mothers with postpartum depression, that can have an effect. So how we attach to our main caregiver and how we attach to our partner, it will be very similar. And a lot of this happens before we're even verbal. So this is pre-verbal stuff. But of course, we bring this into our relationships as well, and that will then have it'll then determine how we react in conflict. So let me go back to the beginning. Let's talk about these 4 different attachment styles that there are. As you can see, there's secure attachment. And that's about 50% of us. 50% of us have a secure attachment. And that means that we grow up being trusting, confident, we explore, we believe in our self-worth, we have a positive self-image. And that's come from parents or a main caregiver that has been pretty responsive to us and has been able to mirror what we are what we are feeling when we're a baby. That's the way we teach empathy. The brain learns as we receive attunement. So if the baby's crying, the mother doesn't come pick the baby up and laugh. The mother is soothing to the child, and the child feels soothed. But when the baby is playful, the mother's also responding in a playful way. And that means that there's certain brain development going on that produces empathy in the child and then adult. So anyway, secure attachment. It means they are honest and open and confident in their relationships because they've received messages from their main caregiver that they're okay. Then we have across avoidant attachment. And these attachments were discovered during they called it the strange situation experiment, and that was done by Mary Ainsworth. And what she did, I think in the 50s or 60s, she had a child and a mother, and they were in a room, and there was a stranger sitting in the corner, and the mum and the baby were playing. The baby was maybe about a year, maybe 9 months to a year. And then at one point, the mother gets up and walks out the room, leaving the baby and the stranger in the room. Now, for a securely attached child, the baby got upset. The baby cried. And then after a minute or two, the mum came back in the room and comforted and soothed the baby, and the baby calmed down quite quickly. The baby was able to regulate their emotions again quite quickly. The avoidant children, and this is sometimes caused by mothers who are unavailable, whether it's emotionally or physically. So what the baby does is the baby learns, when I cry, no one comes. So I have to become self-sufficient, self-reliant, strong, and maybe cut off from my feelings. And in the strange experiment, what was interesting with these babies is when their mother got up and left the room, the baby would look, watch the mum go, and just go back to playing. Was fine, wasn't bothered. But interestingly, when they monitored the baby's heart rate, it really increased. So the baby was actually stressed, but wasn't showing it. Had perhaps learned, there's no point in showing this. I don't get the soothing and the comfort that I ask for. The next group is anxious. And avoidant, about 20% of the population. Anxious, the same, about 20% of the population. And these are people who have perhaps had inconsistent or unreliable care when they were children. So sometimes the mum would come, sometimes the mother wouldn't. And also the mother was quite anxious and the child could pick that up. So relating then becomes quite an anxious energy around it. And they make for people who are insecure. They need constant reassurance or a lot of reassurance. They have real fears of abandonment or rejection. And in the strange situation experiment, those children would get upset when mummy left, and then mum would come back in the room and they would be very angry with mum. They would be going to mum and then they'd be arching their back away and pulling away from her and then wanting her and not wanting her. There was a real push and pull. They didn't know what to do. And then disorganized attachment, that's about 10% of the population, they think. And that is children with really contradictory behaviors. And that's a lot of the time caused by abuse or cruelty, neglect. So the child goes to the mother for comfort, for soothing, but then receives some cruelty. And so the child is so confused and doesn't know what to do. So these are the sort of attachment styles that we see in children, but they correspond to ourselves in adulthood. And this is how sometimes they can affect how we relate in adulthood, in our relationships. And sometimes an interesting thing to do is to think about maybe 5 words that would describe how you and your main caregiver, maybe your mum or dad, connected when you were younger. When you were really young, how would you describe that relationship and how you related? And then maybe get those 5 words and just see if there's any similarity to how you relate now in your adult intimate relationship. There's also there's lots of online things you can do to work out your attachment style, and it can be quite interesting. And the way attachment style is not set. So if you are avoidant, for example, it doesn't mean you're avoidant with everyone. There will be perhaps some people who you feel secure enough with that you can be very emotionally intimate and let down your guard and maybe be a little bit vulnerable, because for those who are avoidant, the real drive is be strong. And these attachment styles, they're kind of set, but they can also be changed because of neuroplasticity. The brain can change, and so our attachment styles can change. But the essence of a good relationship is about supporting one another. And it's that message of you can count on me, I'll always be here for you, we are attached. And it's really in our sort of blueprint. We really need that to be well. And so sometimes in relationships, we can lose that. We don't get those messages. And depending on our attachment styles might depend on how we communicate that these needs aren't being met. So for example, somebody with secure attachment may be able to say, may be able to go to that vulnerable place and say, hey honey, I'm feeling a bit neglected, or I'm feeling there's a distance between us. Is it just me, or are you feeling it too? What can I do for you to get you closer to me? And how can we reconnect? And I mean, I think sometimes that takes bravery, that takes courage, but it's that ability to go to this vulnerable place, to be able to check in with yourself and work out how you are feeling, and then have the courage to find the words to be able to really gently, in a safe environment, be able to share that experience. So Eric, if you go on to the next slide, let me show you something else that can happen. If the two in the relationship aren't as securely attached. So as I was saying, we all need to feel loved, cared for, valued, important, and we need this secure attachment from cradle through to grave. So this diagram is going to show two people in a relationship and how sometimes they behave, and you'll see the behavior does not correspond with the need and what they're actually feeling. So if we start down in the pursuer section, down at A. So what's going on here is, let me just make that a bit bigger for me. Okay, so I yearn for this. Oh, I'm trying to read it. I yearn for this. This is how I wish that I could feel in this relationship always. So what's underneath that is, I wish to be completely understood. I wish to be aligned with you. I wish to feel secure, loved, cared for, treasured. So that's the need. That's kind of blueprinted in us. So that's the very deepest need. And then B, what I actually, my eyesight's so bad I can't read it. What I yearn for is challenged. So what I'm wanting, I'm not getting. It's being challenged. It seems not to be happening. So the vulnerable feeling that comes out is fear. What's happening in this relationship? Am I still loved? Am I still needed? Am I still wanted? Panic. Sometimes deep sadness, deep hurt. So very, very emotional and vulnerable feelings that are difficult to feel. Basically, I perceive that you don't love me and I'm not your priority. Very, very hard to feel. So that's happening under the surface. Now, what's easier to feel is C, which is anger, frustration, or jealousy, or anxiety, or wanting to control, for the pursuer, grabbing at, trying to get their needs met that way. So those are much easier, more, I feel I've got a bit of control here, emotions. The secondary, the primary emotions, the ones I said before, very hard to feel. So we bounce out of them and find something easier, which is sometimes anger, frustration. And then you could be thinking about yourself, I'm a failure, or I'm unlovable, or I can't get through to him. I'll use the pursuer as a woman. I can't get through to him. I'm not enough. I'm always taken for granted. So these are the kind of thought processes that are coming in. What you're thinking about him might be, he's so emotionally distant, he's fed up with me, he wants someone else, I can't get through to him, he never listens or understands or gives me what I need. And then that expresses itself with behavior, which can come across then as demanding, critical, angry, conflicting, shouting, because you're pursuing, because this need of yours, this deep down need of, I want to be loved, you're not getting it. So you go hunting for it, and it almost feels like a hunt at times. Now, what that does, if we follow this infinity cycle down, we have the withdrawer. So maybe if the pursuer had an anxious attachment style, remember I said these are the ones that sometimes feel neglected, their big fear is rejection, they need lots of reassurance from a relationship. If someone with an anxious attachment style marries someone with an avoidant attachment style, remember, they're the ones that pull back. They're the ones that have learned to be strong, to be independent, to not need another, to get on with it themselves. But we're all human. So underneath, in all of us, we have this need to be loved and cared for and valued and treasured. So look at our infinity cycle. We have the pursuer who's saying, come here, I want more, I need more, you're not giving me enough, tell me I'm okay, tell me we're okay. And the withdrawer is going, so the underneath feelings are, I'm not enough. They're back to the panic. They're back to the, I'm not going to be able to sustain this relationship. I'm not going to be able to keep this relationship going. I don't have enough. So sadness, fear, panic. And then the next emotions that are just over the surface this time are, I want to withdraw. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling cross and angry. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling cornered. I'm feeling this is suffocating. This is too much. They're thinking about themselves, like almost the same things. I'm a failure. I'm not enough. I can't give her what she needs. I'm going to lose her. They're thinking about the partner. She's so demanding. She expects too much from me. This is too much. Maybe we shouldn't be together. And then the behavior of the withdrawer is obviously to withdraw. And that can be both physically and psychologically, to either physically leave the room or just leave the room, but still be very there. And so you can see this infinity loop then kicks right into the pursuer's insecurities again. Where's he gone? He's got even more distant. I need to pursue more. And the withdrawer, here she comes again. I need to withdraw more. And you can see how this loop just goes on and on. And over time, the pattern becomes rigid and happens more and more quickly in the relationship. So couples feel stuck in these repeating cycles of isolation and disconnection and pain and pursuit. So here's how our attachment styles can also interact with how we deal with conflict and communication. And of course, the important thing here is to step out of the cycle, is to actually recognize that we're in the cycle. Look, we're doing that thing we do. The pursuer has to be able to recognize it and stop and regulate their body and step back, allow the withdrawer space so that he can then also recognize, I was in that cycle. Let me just breathe for a bit. Let me find my equilibrium. And then I can step in towards the pursuer. So we can both step in towards one another a little bit rather than there being a chase going on. And so as they slow down, bring their bodies back into homeostasis and work for couple preservation rather than self-preservation, because when they're in the cycle, that's what's happening. They're just in self-preservation. They can start to rebuild. They can start to have the conversations and recognize these needs that we both have. How can we meet them? And by doing this, they start to build new neural pathways in the brain, which helps to change this pattern of being, this way that they just fell into the cycle over and over again. and these new neural pathways are set up. And then they can fight the real problem, which is the cycle, not them. Okay. Can we have the next slide, please, Eric? Remember our drama triangle? I just want to tell you, the way out of the drama triangle. I want to talk to you about the winner's triangle. Look at the 3 areas. Instead of victim, now we have vulnerable. Instead of rescuer, now we have resourceful. And instead of persecutor, now we have powerful. And this was devised by Chow in 1990. And again, it's so helpful. This is about empowerment. This is the savior's way, actually. This is the way of agency. We choose to be in these places rather than in more Satan's plan, more the natural man, which was a drama triangle. So victim this time. I've got a problem. I'm going to own it. I know it's mine. And in fact, I can also see it as a learning opportunity. It's tough, but I know I'm going to be able to find ways out of my problem. I've got friends I can ask advice of. I've got Google. I've got books. I've got the Lord. I've got prayer. I've got lots of resources that I can use to get out of my problem. Can you hear the difference between victim and vulnerable? Resourceful. Instead of, I'm going to come and save you, I'm the rescuer, because we know really there's only one rescuer. Resourceful is, oh, wow, you've got a problem. Oh, I'm coming down there. I'm going to sit with you. I'm going to listen. I'm going to hear what your problem is. I'm going to ask you questions like, have you ever had a problem like this before? And if so, what did you do? Or I'm going to say, if this problem is happening to your best friend, what advice would you give them? And I'm going to help you find your own answers because I have faith in you and I trust you. And I know that you'll be able to find your way out of your problem. But I'll be right beside you, empathizing and understanding. But I'm not going to pull you out of it because I recognize by doing that, I kind of keep you in victim. I kind of keep you helpless because you never learn the skills yourself. And then there's powerful. Instead of persecutor, who was saying, it's your fault, you're to blame, it's all about you, if only you would change. Powerful is about assertiveness. And it's saying, we got a problem here. What happened? How did we get here? Did we misunderstand one another? What happened? What part did we both play in the place we're in now? And what are we both going to do to get out of where we are? And so I hope you can hear the difference. I think you can see Eric and I have been talking about some of the difficulties we have in communication and what goes on underneath it. And now we're coming up with some of the strategies. You saw it in the cycle, how to have conversations that then meant, let me share some of my vulnerability with you. Let me share what's underneath this so that we can then start to talk about needs and getting them met. And then the winner's triangle, which supersedes the drama triangle. Okay, Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Exactly. So what we are trying to go to is we understand our human, maybe sometimes tendencies or, challenges. And I just want to look at especially the conflicts now, like what gets us out. Because as I said before, in the words of Jordan Peterson, conflict avoided is conflict multiplied. So, but when we are looking at solutions, the first one I want to talk about is how can we rediscover our sight? Remember, I talked about this tendency to self-deceive us, how we end up being blind to how we add to the conflict. Maybe like I was with in the divorce of my parents, how I was actually adding pain and problems, but I was not able to see it. I will focus mainly on this part now. And I will do this by taking one story from our scriptures, which I think illustrate this point beautifully. So in the book of Alma, we meet the sons of Messiah, who are born into a time when you remember, for 500 years there had been the split between the Lamanites and the Nephites. They were born into that time, and it was actually a really hostile time. So the Nephites and the Lamanites really hated each other, and the Nephites were so much full of this hate that they said, well, let's take up arms against the Lamanites, that they not destroy us, that we destroy them. And so what the view of the Nephites was, like, they saw the Lamanites as enemies, worthy of, killing them, destroying them. But the sons of Messiah, also through certain experiences that they had themselves, never got into this mindset, into this mode of like seeing them as enemies, because they were seen, by God as, worthy of being redeemed. They also saw the Lamanites as brothers. They wanted to cure them of their hatred. So this is the first part that often we when we think like, okay, we're in this conflict and we feel like we are challenged, like maybe we feel like only the other person is at fault, but there might be a tiny little bit that is our fault. It's really hard to discover, like, okay, what is my part in all of this? It's easier to just rediscover the truth about the other person, which is that they are actually our brothers and sisters. Now, you might say, well, that's a nice story from the scriptures, but I don't see my spouse as an enemy. I just sometimes feel like he or she should, shut up, or like not do this or that, or like not be so bickering about this, or if just my dad would leave me alone. Like, I don't see them as enemies. I just want them to leave me alone. So think about seeing people as enemies more in terms of seeing them like I see objects, things that I can use or ignore. And this actually happens all the time. It's like I can't get through a day without seeing some people, like even really close people, my own family often, as being in my way, and in a sort being my enemy. But then when we go into this, it's like, okay, well, these people are not objects. They are, they have needs and challenges. They have hopes and dreams, just like I do. They're actually really my brothers and sisters. They're really worthy of my love. They're able to be redeemed. Then this changes something in us. And this is what we learn from the sons of Messiah, that they, saw the Lamanites really in that light. And because they saw them, they were able to bridge that conflict that had been going on for centuries. Now, when we manage to make this shift, to rediscover our side of the other human being as human, really, then something miraculous happens. It's not just that this is good for us in the conflict, but it also has an effect on the person that we are in conflict with. We see this in the second part of the story. That the sons of Messiah converted lots of the Lamanites, who then actually called themselves anti-Nephilites. And these anti-Nephilites were then attacked by their former, landmates, the Lamanites. But when the army of the Lamanites came towards the anti-Nephilites, they chose the same vision, the same love that the sons of Messiah had shown them. They also saw these attacking Lamanites not as enemies, but as brothers. And something miraculous happened, like when the anti-Nephilites, they bowed down and, prayed to God and would not fight against the attacking army. And this had a profound effect on the attacking Lamanites. And we read this in the 24th chapter of Alma. So the first effect was, when the Lamanites saw that their brethren, the anti-Nephilites, would not flee from the sword, but that they lay down and perished, they desisted from slaying them. So the first thing that happens when we show that sort of love, when we see another person not as enemy, but as a brother and sister, is that often the other person at least stops destructive behavior towards us. Then the second thing that happened, there were many of the Lamanites in whom the heart swelled for those of their brethren, the Anti-Nephilites, who had fallen under the sword. Remember, they were just ready to kill all of them, and now suddenly they had compassion. It completely changed like the attitude towards them. Why? Because the Anti-Nephilites were able to show that love. And then third, when the Lamanites cast down their weapons, and they would not, they wouldn't continue the war because of the murders which they had committed and these murders started to afflict them. They felt that there was something wrong about the behavior too. So by rediscovering our own side and treating other people that way, we are doing lots and lots of work towards helping the other person rediscover their side of us too. And then, once we have established this mutual humanity again, then we can communicate, then we can solve a conflict, then we can have conversations and negotiations that really bear good fruits, where conflict can become constructive. So then I just have two more invitations to you in regards to conflict. First, don't look away, pay attention, address the conflict. I once had a car on Hawaii, actually. I bought it off a friend. But every car has some warning lights. There's not enough oil, or whatever's in there. And in this car, actually, there was like black tape over these things, because like, it's fine, don't worry, the lights are always on, but there's enough oil. So I just want to invite you, like, if there's warning lights in your relationships, there's little things, if you hear like a knocking in the engine, or like whatever it is, little hints that there might be an issue, don't push it away. Don't tape over those warning lights. And I love this quote from Jordan Peterson, where he says, "There's little in a marriage that is so little that it is not worth fighting about." I really believe that. Like, there's nothing that is not worth that we talk it out, that we address it. And the quicker we do that, the less it hardens into a full-blown conflict that is able to destroy relationships. So don't tape over the warning lights. And the last one, as I said at the very beginning, none of us is like, maybe there's some, but most of us are not really good at conflict. We struggle at it for various reasons, but we can become better at it. What I've seen is that as we learn more about how conflicts work and practice, many of the things that also Traci was talking about, like understanding ourselves, understanding how communication works, how we often talk without being understood, or like listen without really listening. All these things, these are learnable. These are things that we can get better at. So I just want to show you one thing here. We all have conflict styles. So we are sometimes more or less assertive, or sometimes more or less cooperative. But what we want to go is from the left-hand corner, where we just are conflict avoiding. We want to move further to the right and up. So we don't want to compete. That's like just a win-lose situation. We also don't want to just accommodate, where we just like, okay, as long as you have your will and we have peace, it's fine. Compromise is also okay, I guess. But the thing is, when people just compromise, actually both parties go away feeling like they focus on the things that they didn't get. So what we want to get at over time, learning our skills, becoming better at understanding our own conflict styles, and one of the person we're in conflict with, is we want to start to collaborate, which means we want to be assertive. It's like, know what we want in this relationship, in this issue, but also be cooperative. It's like, okay, what does the other person what is the other person trying to get at? What are they trying to pursue? And where can we find a future that works for both of us? Okay, so keep learning. This is my last invitation here. And with that, give it back to Traci.
Thanks, Eric. I love that. Okay, so just to sort of summarize what I've been saying, look out for the drama triangle. It will get in the way of your communication. If you see yourself in any of the roles, move out and move towards the winner's triangle. Look out for our defenses. Some of the time when we are feeling vulnerable, we will protect. Of course we will. And so that could take us into that cycle. Remember, we might pursue or we might withdraw, we might pull back. But can we get to a place where we can just stand still and breathe and work out what our needs are, and maybe express them to your husband or wife, boyfriend or girlfriend, or better still, ask them what their needs are. So really be able to say our vulnerabilities, to share that. There's a real myth that if we share our vulnerabilities, people will be put off in some way. Actually, the data shows the exact opposite. That's when people are drawn to one another, when we express our authentic vulnerabilities, weaknesses, needs. You know, and I think of Ether 12, the famous scriptures about weaknesses being turned into strengths through the Lord. And I think that's what we can do as we share with our loved ones some of our fears, worries, pains, desires, longings. And then we feel that real bond when we are understood, when we are heard, when we are emotionally touched. So these are the kind of conversations that our relationships are longing for. These are the conversations that strengthen our relationships. So pay attention and stay present, be mindful. Remember, not looking at the person, nodding and thinking, I'm going to say that next, I'm going to say this next. Stay in the conversation, just keep listening to what they're saying. Don't multitask. We're not good at it. Even women, I know we like to think we can, but our brain is swapping between the two chores. And so if someone's talking to us and we're doing something else, we're not hearing all they have to say. Ask open questions with authentic curiosity. Stay curious. Every single person we have a conversation with has something incredible to teach us if we let them. So stay curious, stay focused, no daydreaming, another one of mine, and listen in capital letters. Just to finish my part, and then I'll hand it over to Eric for the very last bit. There's a great couple dialogue called Imago. And there are a couple of parts to it. The first part is mirroring. So you mirror what your partner's saying just to make sure, am I getting this right? Is this what you're saying? And then they'll say yes or no. And is there anything more you want me to know? And they'll tell you a bit more. Is there anything more? And then you summarize, okay, so this is what I've heard you say. And you go over it all. Is that correct? You're continually checking in. Think how that person's feeling understood and heard. And then you're validating. I can really understand your point of view. I can really see why you were thinking that way, why you behaved that way. And then finally, empathizing. So did that feel like this for you? I imagine that must have been pretty fill in the blanks. And then you have someone in a conversation with you, you have a partner who really feels understood. Finally, they've got it. They've got me. I'm okay. Remember at the very start, I asked you to think of a time that you maybe did feel misunderstood and how that felt. Well, now just think of a time when you have really felt heard, gotten, understood, and feel how that felt and feel the beauty of that experience. I hope what I've shared has been helpful to you. And now we're going to hand over to Eric for the final slides, and we're going to end.
Thank you, Traci. Yeah, so we just wanted to, at the end, maybe for everyone who is now feeling like, okay, well, these are nice tools, but doesn't feel like at all like, okay, our relationship, my relationship might not be that way. You know, it's like there might be a long way to go. There might be lots of things that, you know, they don't feel like they're not even close to the ideal. You know, for everyone who's feeling that, we just wanted to leave you with a final message of maybe of hope. We all follow the Savior, and he's probably was the most broken of all. But he knows how we feel in that, and I know that he can, you know, lift us. So this is a quote that I like a lot. Do not be dismayed by the brokenness of the world. All things break, and all things can be mended, not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is in you, that is you. Thank you very much. All right. We now have a bit of time for some questions. If there's any, you can put them either in the chat or just unmute yourself. And we just put on, let's see, we have one final slide with some resources. There's some books that both for relationships and communication and conflict resolution that, you know, if you want to learn more, you can contact Traci or me or, you know, whomever from us from the Euro seminar, or just go to some of these groups. Okay. Good. We have two hands up here. First Vincent and then Marjorie.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I have one question. What advice would you give if you find a situation where there is a couple and one of the two won't accept any part of responsibility? They won't acknowledge any kind of mistakes, you know, and they reject everything on the other partner, because the struggle is that, yeah, what do you do in that kind of situation? Because if the other partner takes all the responsibility, then that comforts the other one into a position where he's always spotless, you know. So what do you think about that?
Eric, do you want to go first, or do you want?
Yes. I can go first. Well, the thing is that there's really nothing that we can actually do to force another person. I think that is always the limit that we'll have. And I mean, you talked about like the one always taking responsibility for everything. I don't feel like that. It's not, you know, sometimes people are, how can I say that? They will take responsibility, but like in a way that they're not really seeing the other person as a friend, you know, as a brother. They're just like, well, I can do it better. And then this is, you know, let me just take over. But I think to really love somebody is also to do the things that like help them the most. And sometimes that is to not take responsibility, but to, you know, like whatever we feel like the person really needs. But there's no guarantee at the end of the day, you know, like sometimes this, you know, this goes for a long time. Maybe think my dad is listening here. I know that his heart was always open for years towards me, but I just pushed it away for a very, very long time. And it, you know, there were circumstances that had to change. There was also time that had to pass. And at some point, the time came, yeah. But there's never a guarantee, and sometimes it's a really long struggle. But I feel like when we can keep our heart open, even if it hurts, there might come the time when the other person also opens their heart.
Yeah, I would agree with Eric. You can't force somebody to take responsibility, but you can use certain language. So like, as a therapist, I would be saying, so what part, like I said, do you think both of you played in this? What could you have done differently, both of you? And so you just...
Can I give you I have an idea of something that really happened. So maybe if
Yeah.
I explain it, that will help you to answer me in a more precise manner. So there is a couple, and the lady in the couple, she very easily feel upset and feel that she's not respected big time. But for stuff that nobody noticed, you know, it's like she's very sensitive. So she will get mad, start to scream and everything. And when I ask her, well, your partner is not perfect, can work on himself, but you can change yourself. You cannot change him, you can change yourself. What could you change? I mean, if Jesus was in your shoes, what would he have done? You know, that kind of question. And he would have done the same, you know, he would have communicated his anger and in his disappointment and blah blah blah. So she's always in the mindset of justifying her position because the other one provoked the situation, you know?
Yeah.
But all the time, that kind of pattern. So anyway.
Yeah. And so maybe, and Vincent, you know, maybe you're not going to get through to her quickly. This might take a long time. She might be in and out of therapy, but maybe there is something kind of along with what Eric said. So what was it like for your husband? What was going on for him? Why do you think he behaved in this way? It's almost like she can't empathize with anyone else. She's stuck so much in her own world. So maybe there's something about, can she step into her husband's shoes and just understand a little bit, and that might be helpful for her. I think I think as well, if you were working with her, it would be really important to empathize with her emotions, so that she feels safe and doesn't have to protect. But then also, I wonder, I mean, I've asked a teenager I was working with once, I wonder what it's like being your school teacher. Because I just wanted him to recognize what it must be like to be on the other side of the desk from him and how he was behaving in school. And so sometimes those questions can be helpful. Again, if she is willing. So it sounds like she's really stuck in the victim position. And there are payoffs to being in victim. That's why sometimes it's very hard to get people to step out of victim, because it's working for them in some way. So you might also want to start to explore what's the payoff, what's working for her, but there will also be a cost to this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent, for your question also. Okay, Marjorie, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So, thanks for sharing. I was listening. I was impressed for all the information. I have a question about, you were talking about couples and that in some scenarios, but what happened, what can we do before that, like before a marriage? I mean, in the step of dating, there are a lot of problems, even in dating, I think, that it's impossible. I mean, not maybe impossible, but it's difficult to know each other if the other person is in the first triangle. I mean, for example, someone wants to talk with another person, and this person all the time needs that the other person tell the other that it's important. So I think maybe it's not the best way to know another person. Maybe it's better to look or know other person. I don't know, like it's difficult to know other people if they are in one way of that triangle. So how can we really know each other if maybe everyone is in a part of the triangle? I don't know. That's my question.
So what's the question? How can we get to know people better? How can we recognize if people are in the triangle?
No, I mean, I think at some point maybe everyone is in a in a corner of a triangle. So how can we really know each other if maybe we or the others are in a part of a triangle? So I think, when are we going to know really each other if we need to heal? So maybe first we need to heal ourselves, like therapy and that, and then start to date people and that? Or is it possible to know other people even when you know that you need to heal? I don't know. What will be healthy? What will be best? First heal, then know persons. I don't know.
I think it depends on the individual. So I think we all come with wounds. I don't think you can be in mortality and not have wounds of some type. And so I think if we waited before we formed partnerships until we were completely healed, then I think we'd be waiting a long time. I mean, I'll just share something with you. I'm 53 and I was adopted, and I've just started doing that work. So I've just started dipping into the healing from adoption. And so, you know, I don't think we can get completely healed before we go into relationships. And of course, that's one of the great things about a marriage, that we help one another in our frailties, in our vulnerabilities, that we're team. My husband and I, we're team DeMarco. And so we're working together to help one another. Of course, if somebody's, you know, terribly wounded and there's been lots of trauma or neglect, then maybe some work can be helpful before they get married. But, you know, I think it's different for all individuals.
I can
I
just
don't know if that answers your question, Marjorie.
Yeah,
Eric,
thank
can
you.
you go?
I mean, we are not going to, like, we cannot expect to be completely healed. But it's necessary. I mean, I think the most healthy thing is that we recognize that we need to heal, and also in the process try to know other people, and also as you said, if we notice that someone needs first to solve some things, maybe, I don't know, but it's just my opinion. I think it's what I understood. Maybe that this person took their time or something like that, like give a time to the other person, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mentor. I think if the relationship, you know, as it grows, becomes a place of healing, then that's a good indication. If it's something that, like, one person is so wounded that he always sucks the energy out of the other one, you know, it might not be the, you know, because I feel like in a relationship, like if it's mutual and like if there's healing happening on both sides, then this is a good sign. But if it's very one-sided, you know, it can get really tough on the one partner who is always giving and always trying to heal the other. Thank you. Traci, we have one more question here from Christopher regarding neuroplasticity. So he says, if I have the anxious attachment style, if it is possible to heal from it at any point in my life, what would be tips to move towards that goal?
Yeah. And so I think that absolutely is possible. I think the neuroplasticity is saying that can happen. Our attachment styles can change depending on how well we look after ourselves or the relationships that we engage in. And so what can be really helpful is being in a relationship with someone who is securely attached, because you saw what happened in the cycle when you're paired with someone who's avoidant. So someone who's secure will say, things like, whoa, you're okay, I've got you, I'm here for you, it's all right. You know, they will be giving you that reassurance and that security that you're longing for. And eventually you'll be able to be thinking to yourself, oh, I feel like doing that thing I do again, but I know why I do that. My eyes are open to that. I understand it, and I can recognize, let me look at the evidence. Let me look at the evidence that I am loved, that I am cared for, that I'm not going to be rejected or abandoned. And so you start to build up your security in this way. So it's about sort of looking after yourself, picking good friends, a good partner, someone who's not going to break your trust, but people who are able to, you know, commit to relationships and are able to have the vulnerable conversations. Let me understand what you need right now. Let me give this to you. Let me tell you what I need from you right now. Can you give this to me? You know, it's collaboration. It's interdependency. And yes, I do believe that attachment styles can change. And you might find that there are some people that you feel more secure with, and there might be some people you feel more insecure with. You might already be noticing that yourself.